So good morning, everybody. I hope everybody can hear and see me clearly. Many participants, I would say, from all around the world are joining us on the second day of this global e-conference organized by socialprotection.org, which most of you know is a virtual learning and exchange platform for a whole range of different actors active in social protection, including international organizations, development practitioners, academia, civil society organizations, social partners, etc., etc. And so this global e-conference, to nobody's surprise, is obviously dedicated to COVID-19. And more specifically, the question, can we turn the COVID-19 crisis into an opportunity? And how to turn it into an opportunity, and the explicit and important role that social protection could play in this. We have a very interesting lineup here today with not more and not less than 7 distinguished speakers from all different backgrounds. I will also shortly introduce them to you. Today's session is entirely dedicated to the question of financing, because while we are indeed confronted with important coverage gaps, many studies reveal that these coverage gaps are also due to the fact that there is massive financing gaps for sustainable social protection. And so today we want to make the case, together with our speakers, the case for national and global solidarity to build social protection systems and social protection policies which are adequate, sustainable, and adapted to developments in the world of work. And when we say systems and policies, it's important to underline, because we want to see people to enjoy their basic human right to social protection. We're no longer speaking about charity, we're speaking about rights-based entitlements enshrined in legislation, in adequate regulation. I think most of these introductory comments give a little bit the frame within which we find ourselves here in this roundtable on Tuesday morning. We'll be looking at an interesting lineup of speakers who have all joined us already prior to this session. Thanks to all of you. We have tested audio and video, and I would hope indeed that all of the attendees are able to hear us and see us as clearly as I can for the moment. So here are our different speakers. We have all given them a number of minutes, and I would once again like to ask them, invite them, beg them to respect those time limits, just to make sure that towards the end of the session, we can indeed have also an exchange with the attendees. Now, the exchange, how will this happen? For most of you, there is a chat box. If you click up on the little box here at the top, you see Q&A, which you can then access, and then you can leave your questions there. And I will try to do my best together with somebody who is assisting me in this to capture your questions, and then towards the end of the session, I will immediately pass these on to the speaker. So do indicate to whom you would like to address your question. Otherwise, of course, I will decide who will receive a given question. So I hope with 200 people, more than 200 people registered, that many of you are indeed ready to go for it, because I would say with no further ado, let's dive into the subject of today, a case for national and global solidarity to fund sustainably social protection systems. I will go in the order of the speakers as they are listed here on the screen. And so our first colleague that I will call upon, and he's the one who probably makes the hardest sacrifice to join us, because he joined us from Washington, and it's about 2 a.m. in the morning there. But thanks a lot, Mr. Nenad Rava, to join us here. You're the head of program of the Joint SDG Fund, and it would be great to have also within 3 minutes your perspective on the case for, I would say, global solidarity to establish social protection systems. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will provide the basic overview of the fund and specifically our investment in social protection, and I'll be then open for questions to provide more detail. So the Joint SDG Fund is a new global pooled funding mechanism. We were launched less than 2 years ago. The mechanism that invests into transformative policy and strategic financing to accelerate the SDGs. We operate through joint programs, which is an integrated multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder approach implemented by UN agencies, coordinated by the UN resident coordinator at the country level, led by national stakeholders. Or in the popular expression, we are investing into breaking down the silos to facilitate the catalytic impact across the SDGs. On the input side, the fund is owned by all 40 plus UN entities and is established as a multi-partner trust fund with more than a dozen donors. Only the first portfolio on social protection that I'm going to present today, there's a total of 138 participating UN organizations, which means UN entities at the country level, and more than 600 local partners from government, private sector, and civil society. So the very first ever global call for proposals that we launched was on social protection and leaving no one behind. It was in early 2019. We were discussing the focus and the scope of the first global call, and it was decided that integrated social protection and leaving no one behind is the best combination for systemic policy innovation and SDG acceleration. It was focused on innovative policy solutions that accelerate the SDGs across the whole spectrum of different goals. So 114 countries applied, and after rigorous independent technical assessment, 35 were asked to develop full joint programs. Actually 39 countries, because we have 2 multi-country offices. So with the co-funding, the overall portfolio investment is $109 million US dollars. The program level theories of change include very diverse spectrum of different results, because social protection was understood as different kinds of vulnerabilities across the life cycle. So we have those working on healthcare, education, social welfare services, childcare, employment, social cohesion, pension systems, a lot of emphasis also on disability. In all of the programs mainstream gender, while a number of those focus specifically on women and the issues that they have in social protection. So the programs were launched in 2020, early, with the ambition to deliver results at scale by January 2022, in mere 2 years. But then COVID happened. So we immediately reacted because the social protection got on the top of the policy agenda, and our investment became even more critical. And even more importantly, the programs were already set up and running, so we had the infrastructure to react very quickly. So there were several courses of action. I'll just list them, and then we can discuss them a bit more in bit more detail later on. So first and foremost, we provided an opportunity to repurpose 20% of program budgets. So roughly a third of the portfolio of 35 joint programs used the opportunity, and they focused on either accelerating implementation, which is maybe counterintuitive, but many of them really saw this as an opportunity to do things even faster, whether those working on shock response social protection or those where governments wanted new social protection policy developed much earlier than planned. Then there were those supporting integrated analysis and assessment, including impact assessments focused on specific vulnerable groups or applying specific, for instance, gender lenses. All different kinds of innovations, and then those supporting government and grassroots communications and advocacy. Secondly, those that did not formally repurpose, they introduced adaptations. So basically, all joint programs introduced adaptations that would make them more relevant in the context of COVID, but still focusing on the systemic impact and not only on the immediate response. So we then put more emphasis on leveraging partnerships, related projects and programs, and leveraging funding and financing, which is the essential catalytic nature of our investment. There were also 2 other interventions. One is that the joint programs emphasize the support to UN country teams and local stakeholders to develop common positions on integrated approach to social protection, which was essential at the moment when all different kinds of initiatives were going all different kinds of directions. So we really tried to, through these joint programs, to help the stakeholders develop common position and have a long-term agenda as well as ability to react immediately. And finally, all joint programs prioritize addressing the systemic impact that COVID has on leaving no one behind and on the SDGs. So this is very beautiful from my side. You can find more information on our website, which is jointsdgfund.org/social protection. And we also have a virtual expo booth on the website of this conference. Thank you very much for the opportunity and looking forward for the questions. Over.
Okay, thank you so much, Nenad Rava, for joining us and for this really concise but good introduction into the work of the SDG Joint Fund, and especially then the flexibility you have shown earlier this year when COVID-19 struck, to indeed have programs reallocate and adapt themselves to this new reality. As you indicated, perhaps indeed during your Q&A session, we can talk about some of the more concrete examples of such programs that you've been able to reallocate over the last few months. Thank you so much. So I will be inviting the second speaker in our list, and that's Mr. Ugo Gentilini. Mr. Ugo Gentilini is the global lead for the Social Assistance Program at the World Bank's Social Protection, Jobs and Global Practice Department. Ugo, I imagine that also the World Bank has done quite a lot of work in the wake of COVID-19, also in scrutinizing social protection responses by governments. And what are some of the lessons that you have learned from all this?
Thank you, Bart. Pleasure being with you and other speakers on the panel. I'd just like to share 3 emerging features in the financing of social protection responses to COVID, based on preliminary and ongoing work with great colleagues like Dominic Richardson, Pamela Dale, Melvin Breton, Alex Peake, and Mohamed Al-Menfi. And the first feature is that financing has been large scale, but uneven in provision. So current pandemic spending is double that of the Great Recession of 2008 and 9, about 4.2% of GDP on average at the time versus 8.7 on average today. And about 18% of that spending today went for social protection, for a total of about 790 billion. And the average provision per capita is about $243, ranging from almost 700 in high-income countries to as low as only $4 per capita in low-income countries. The second feature is that financing is temporary, with a few short-term extensions. So cash transfers in particular represent about 1/3 or 31% of global measures. Those programs are only 3.3 months in duration on average, and about 29% of cash transfers are one-off payments. We recorded that only 16 out of 340 cash transfers programs were extended by about 3.4 months, and mostly up to December. The third feature is that financing is diversified in sources, and based on information available from 31 countries, we see that 48% of them only tap domestic sources, and 23% relied on external sources only, and 29% a bit of a blend of both. Domestic shares in social protection responses increased from nearly 0 in low-income countries to 35% in low and middle-income countries, and 43% in upper middle-income countries. And among the countries that use domestic financing, the most prevalent source was domestic debt and deficit spending occurring in 13 countries. 12 countries restructured or reprioritized budget lines. 8 of them tapped state reserves and contingency funds. And just to give a few very quick illustrations, there are some innovations also in some lower income contexts, like in Mauritania, where a special fund for solidarity was created with state contributions for 170 million. There are different ways of financing the same program, a universal cash transfer. And we have seen Singapore, Hong Kong, and Serbia having different strategies, including reserves, contingency budgets, bonds, and others. Countries have been tapping reserves and reprioritizing, as I said, South Africa, for example, it's part of its scale-up was in part financed using unemployment insurance fund surpluses. In Ukraine, part of the process, including cuts in subsidies, regional budgets, some social services, the planned census, among others. And there are also some interesting private and public partnerships. In Uzbekistan, 5.6 million were generated through donations and charity from individuals and businesses that went to public funds. So to sum up, there is a historical boost in spending in the aggregate, but very high level of variation across and within contexts. There are questions on whether temporary response will become permanent. And in part, this would depend on understanding how these different sources of funding interact over time. For instance, we have seen that unfortunately some of the funding comes from cutting other services, and reprioritizing budget lines is something fluid and will become clear once the year is over. It's quite challenging to find information on sources. Initiatives to, I think, enhance standardization and reporting may greatly help in enhancing the accountability and evidence-based policy making in terms of understanding the sources of financing for social protection. And all of this will appear in the forthcoming note with colleagues that I mentioned at the beginning. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I was already thanking you, but I was still muted. So I'll do it again. Thanks a lot, Mr. Gentilini. First of all, of course, for joining us and for your brief remarks as well within the given time limit. I think really interesting to see indeed that there's been such a boost in spending. I think some of the reviews you have been posting since early March on show that as well. But it's indeed, we see now that it's already receding, and that's where what I said at the beginning, if we want really social protection policies and systems based on rights and rights-based entitlements, how can we ensure that this becomes more permanent? It will be, of course, food for thought and food for further debate for us and later on, certainly. I'm happy to invite now Ms. Valérie Schmidt, who joined the ILO already in 2003, and she currently is the Deputy Director of the Social Protection Department, and she also leads the ILO's global flagship program for national social protection floors. And I think Valérie will be speaking about an important study that the ILO has made recently. Valérie.
Thank you, Bart. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for the colleagues in Asia. So social protection is a human right, but it is not a reality for all, as the previous speakers have already mentioned. Even before COVID-19, 55% of the world's population had no access to social protection benefits at all. And in some regions like Africa, exclusion is much bigger. For instance, in Africa, 82% of the population has today no social protection at all. So these large and persistent gaps in social protection coverage are linked to significant financing gaps that pre-existed prior to COVID, and explain also why most countries were ill prepared to face the current crisis. And as you mentioned, Bart, the ILO has just completed a study on financing gap in social protection. And according to this study, to achieve a social protection floor in 2020, so by the end of this year, developing countries should invest an additional 1.2 trillion US dollars, which represents 3.8% of their GDP. And you can see the first bubble on the slide. For low-income countries, the additional investment would be only of 78 billion US dollar, representing, however, almost 16% of their GDP, which is a relatively much higher share. And this is the second smaller bubble on this slide. If we look at Africa, current investment in social protection and healthcare represent 5.6% of the country's GDP on average, and closing the financial gap would cost an additional 8.2% of the country's GDP, which means that African countries, if they want to achieve the social protection floor by the end of this year, they should multiply by 2.5 their current investment in social protection and health. So as you can see, closing the financing gaps cannot happen in a few months or even in a few years only. It takes several years for social protection systems to develop. And this is why in our study, we also calculated the incremental financial needs that would allow countries to progressively develop their social protection systems and achieve the social protection floor by 2030. And so we concluded that developing countries should, on average, invest an additional 2.2% of their GDP every year to achieve full coverage by 2030. So we all agree today that we need to invest more in social protection, and the crisis has shown that it is possible, although the additional financing support that came from national budgets or from international financial assistance were just a drop actually in the ocean of the needs. Financing more is necessary to make the right to social security a reality for all. It is also desperately needed in order to cope with COVID-19 devastation and to emerge from the crisis and prepare existing social protection systems for future shocks, and notably the climate-related shocks. There are several ways to increase social protection investments through domestic resource mobilization and also relying on external complementary financing assistance that could come from the international community. One promising path that was discussed in the high-level expert meeting organized by the government of France 2 weeks ago is the extension of contributory social protection to workers in the informal economy. This would reduce the need for social assistance and also increase the contribution and tax base in the country. But it is equally important to invest better in social protection to ensure that the allocation of resources allows for the establishment of sustainable, universal, comprehensive and adequate social protection systems, providing the social protection floor for all. And the good news is that we have at our disposal guiding principles that can help us in achieving more and better investments in social protection. International social security standards, such as the recommendation 202 on social protection floors, provide such a concrete roadmap. According to recommendation 202, for instance, countries should explore diverse options of financing, and this would generate more options and more resources for social protection. Recommendation 202 also promotes solidarity in financing, as many groups in the countries may not be able to contribute sufficiently to finance their own social protection. Social dialogue and tripartite representation, which is another principle of recommendation 202, means that social partners, so workers and employers representatives together with civil society, should be part of the design, of course, but also the governance of the social protection systems. And this improves, of course, the accountability of these systems, but also their social sustainability and their efficiency in the long term. So investing more and investing better in social protection require increased coordination between ministries of labor, ministries of social welfare, ministries of finance, development partners, IFIs, as well, of course, as workers, employers' organizations, and civil society. And this is what the ILO and the European Union, together with UNICEF and the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors, are aiming at through a new program focusing on 18 countries to increase synergies between social protection and public finance management. And this tendency, this increased coordination, seems to be happening in countries such as Bangladesh that we will hear in this conference. So I'm really looking forward to listening to the next speakers and for a fruitful discussion. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Valerie, as well. And again, within the time limit given, very interesting to get these latest numbers and latest calculations made by the ILO Social Protection Department. I would say this is indeed an update of the earlier statistical work you had done and presented during the ILO Global Social Protection Week in November last year. And as you said, the numbers are staggering, certainly in absolute numbers, but seen in relative proportion of GDP, I would say as an international community, there is definitely space for us to do something. So let's move on with our speakers and see whether this topic is also coming back at the end of our session during the questions and answers. So let me also once again invite all of our attendees, those who are there and made it for this morning's session. If you have any questions for a specific speaker, please use the chat box and send it to us, and we will be able to give them to our speakers at the end of this session. We are now moving to Bangladesh, where His Excellency Mizanur Rahman is joining us. He is Director General of the Department of Labor in the Ministry of Labor and Unemployment. Thank you so much, Mr. Rahman. I am opening up also your PowerPoint presentation. And as I said, it will have to be rather short, but it's great also to have a government representative here who can also talk about the impact of this crisis on the country and its workers and how the government has responded to that. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Here, I would like to start my presentation with a short overview on the People's Republic of Bangladesh. And I will request to move to the next slide. Here is the content of presentation. And here the government sector in Bangladesh, of Bangladesh economy, COVID-19 impacts in RMG sector, technical and financial assistances to support COVID-19 in RMG, few short-term measures need to be taken to combat the situation and development of sustainable social protection system. Next slide, please. In this slide, the information given will reflect how the RMG sector contributing to the economy of Bangladesh. Next slide, please. Our RMG sector has been financing an unprecedented humanitarian and business catastrophe in COVID-19 situation. I am not going to tell you much, but some of the impacts must be shared. As you know, due to the pandemic situation, many international buyers cancelled or postponed the confirmed orders. Millions of workers became jobless. Fall in export caused to move into layoffs and suspension of factory production, etc. were the results. Next slide, please. Referring to the slide number 6, 7, and 8. As a part of technical assistance, 31 points of valuable instructions given our Honorable Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, and the National Action Plan named Bangladesh Preparedness and Response Plan for COVID-19 in line with international health regulations have been following. Upon these guidelines, some of the initiatives taken by the government and other stakeholders have been mentioned in these slides. Please move to the slide number 9 and 10. Since the beginning of the crisis, the government of Bangladesh has come forward with 19 various financial recovery packages to overcome negative impacts on economy, out of which 5 are directly linked to protect the export-oriented industries, including RMG. For example, $588 million fund to provide salary and allowances support, $3.5 billion loan facility as working capital, etc. are notable here, and it is mentioned in these slides. Please next to slide number 11. We are also grateful to our development partners like World Bank, ADB, IMF, Team Europe, USAID for extending their financial support to Bangladesh in response to COVID-19. We'll expect more support from our development partners will be extended to combat our crisis situation. Next slide, please. This is the slide where few important short-term measures have been cited which need to be taken in future to support COVID-19 in RMG, out of which create awareness on essential health, population and nutrition services through social media, develop short-term program to provide cash assistance to workers, promote social dialogue at the enterprise level, etc. are mentionable. Next slide, please. Respected participants, now I would like to mention here regarding a short-term based social protection cash transfer program that is going to be launched in Bangladesh at a short while. This is a Government of Bangladesh, European Union and Federal Republic of Germany joint funded direct cash transfer program to be implemented by Department of Labor. It has been designed electronically to provide Taka 3,000 per month for maximum 3 months period to the destitute workers of the export-oriented RMG and leather footwear industries. Next slide, please. Few salient features of the mentioned G2P module cash transfer program through MIS have been cited in this slide for your kind information. Next slide, please. Respected participants, I would like to conclude my presentation with the slide which I will mention the development of sustainable social protection system in Bangladesh. Government of Bangladesh, European Union, Federal Republic of Germany joint funded short-term cash transfer program phase 1 for employed destitute workers of export-oriented RMG and leather footwear goods will be considered as a discrete measure to address the COVID-19 situation. After completion of phase 1, government may take up phase 2 of the program, which may be part of its regular safety net programs. Thanks for your patience hearing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mizanur Rahman. As we agreed in preparation for this session, you have really managed to stay within the time limit given, while still highlighting some of the serious impacts of this crisis on Bangladeshi workers, especially in the retail and garment sector. I think also within that sector, the government has taken other initiatives. I learned also that in April of this year, you also joined the garment sector call to action together with ITUC and the IOE, especially to highlight, first of all, the serious brunt taken by workers in the garment sector because they lost their jobs from one day to another, and then indeed try and see whether the government, together with other international partners, can build systems at the national level to ensure at least access to health and income replacement for many of these workers. So thanks a lot for indeed coming back to that with that interesting country example. And that indeed brings me now to our two social partners who play, of course, a pivotal role in everything the ILO does. But it would be very interesting also to hear both from our colleagues from the International Trade Union Confederation and the International Organization of Employers, what their perspective is on this case for national and global solidarity. Let me start with Mr. Matthias Thorns, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the IOE. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good day to all of you from cold and quite rainy Geneva. So we as social partners are very much engaged at international level when it comes to social protection laws and financing of social protection laws. We are part of the ILO, the International Labour Organization, which is the only UN organization which is tripartite, which means we are not just a stakeholder, but we are part of the governance, and we are much engaged with Valerie Schmidt, who already presented the ILO activities on social protection. We also engage on the G20, G7, and together with the L20, which is Labour 20, we call together to the G20 to finance and spend more finance on social protection. You already mentioned, Bart, the call to action where we engage in together with the ITUC. The call to action is an initiative by the IOE, the ITUC, Industry All, about 100 brands, local employers and trade unions, as well as the ILO, to establish sustainable social protection floors in seven priority countries to support workers' income and business continuity in the garment sector by particularly engaging with the international finance institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the European Union, and also some bilateral donors. So we are very much engaged actually in trying to bring finance to social protection from the international level. We also engaged in an initiative which the French government started, and I would really like to thank the French government, and particularly Anoucheh Kafar, for their commitment for this cause. However, it is really not only about finding more funding, but really to spend better, as already said by Valerie, and we really subscribe to that. Because at the end of the day, as Valerie said, the international support is a drop in the ocean. Even if we would take all ODA money and only would spend it on social protection, it would be never enough to meet the needs. And that is what we at the moment experience in the call to action. The needs are so big, and we will never be able to fulfill all the needs. So the aim must be really to strengthen domestic resource mobilization. So all spending, all international funding, all international support really need also to look on capacity building in order to enable countries to increase the domestic resource mobilization. And this is really also to incentivize domestic spending, because at the end of the day, there is room also at national level in each country. It's about priorities. It's making sure that the priorities are right. So international funding needs to incentivize spending from the national level. We as social partners at national level have a key role to play, of course, to make sure that the systems which are established at national level really responds to the needs of the real economy, of workers and employers. And what we see in the call to action, the national working groups which we have established in the 7 countries are the real benefit. That is where the World Bank, the IMF, this European Union and other donors are looking at, to have this bipartite and tripartite engagement at national level to ensure that the money goes into the real economy. Let me also just confirm what Valerie said. We have already a tripartite global consensus what needs to be done with the ILO recommendation 202 on social protection floors. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? We have the guiding principles, we have the roadmap. It is really to start to walk the talk and to implement our commitments. And finally, this question needs a whole of society, a whole of economy approach. With more than 60% in the informal sector, we will never be able to finance sustainable social protection systems without bringing them, at least contributing to the systems. So that would be my contribution. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Matthias, as well, for your remarks on this and highlighting a whole number of issues that the IOE has been active on as well. I think it's very good also that you underline the importance of the ILO standards like recommendation 202. And whilst you were saying as well, with 60% of the global workforce in the informal economy, it's probably also good to highlight the importance of recommendation 204 and how to ensure the transition from the informal to the formal economy. And indeed, there is definitely a potential to tap into also there's potential to tap also into their contributory capacity to social protection schemes, rights-based social protection schemes. So there I would like to invite now Alison Tate. Alison Tate is Director of the Economic and Social Policy Department of the International Trade Union Confederation, and she has been liaising with UN bodies as well as with civil society and other external actors on behalf of the ITUC, and has been closely following up on many of the issues that are under discussion today. So Alison, over to you, please.
Thank you. I'm very happy to come into this conversation following both the realities that Mr. Rahman outlined of the impact of COVID on workers and indeed businesses in Bangladesh, and to follow my colleague from the IOE, where those points he's made are especially important to think about in the context of, indeed, the instruments you just mentioned, Bart. Speaking about the ILO standards and ensuring that that provides what is already a foundation that's been agreed globally as the set of standards for ensuring social protection is a reality. Now we get to how do we make it a reality? So I think that I'd like to start by reiterating that social protection is a crucial issue for trade unions around the world. Not only is social protection a fundamental right enshrined in numerous international human rights frameworks, but it is a key component of decent work. So we can understand the role then of social protection as a tool to reduce poverty and inequality, indeed addressing inequalities, including promoting gender equality, supporting the formalization of the informal economy, as was just mentioned, supporting education and skills development, so necessary in addressing not just current needs, but future needs of current workers and future generations of workers, in promoting access to quality employment, and boosting the economy and supporting job creation of decent work. As representatives of workers, unions play a crucial role in the development and the extension of social protection systems. Unions are very involved in campaigning for the extension of social protection and defending these systems from retrenchment, campaigning against funding cuts and austerity, negotiating reforms in tripartite committees, both at national level, but also engaging in international policy setting, monitoring the implementation of social protection reforms, and even administering benefits and services in some countries. So let me give you a few examples. Trade unions have been involved in the administration of social protection benefits in Belgium and Denmark, campaigning for the extension of social protection in Nepal, tripartite national dialogues for social security reform in Indonesia and Ghana, expanding coverage of social protection, for example, to irregular workers or informal forms of employment in countries including in Uruguay, India, and Rwanda. Unions have been campaigning against cutbacks to social spending in countries such as the UK, Croatia, and Greece. At the international level, where indeed the ITUC coordinates not only with our affiliates, but with global union federations also, we have negotiated the development of international labor standards, as Matthias just spoke to, for social protection, along with governments and employer bodies, most notably the ILO Convention 102 and Recommendation 202 on social protection floors. So whilst this conversation is about financing and designing programs that can meet the needs facing many countries around the world, we know that developing those financing programs and ensuring the accountability of those financing programs needs to be on a strong foundation. And we believe that those ILO instruments I've just listed form a great foundation for that. So with the COVID-19 pandemic having exposed the fault lines of national and a global divide between those who have social protection and those who do not, unions across the world are now calling for an international solidarity instrument, a global social protection fund, which would catalyze social protection financing for those countries lacking the immediate capacity to set up comprehensive social protection systems. While financing social protection is the responsibility of national governments, such a fund, we believe, could help bridge funding gaps for the poorest countries with the aim of supporting them to build up adequate and sustainable systems over the long run. And as Ugo mentioned in his presentation, we see many of the efforts thus far focusing on the most urgent and immediate short-term needs in terms of cash transfers. But what we need to see is an investment in a longer-term sustainable system in countries that have just simply not had access to the financing in the past to do that. So such an act of international solidarity would help bridge the social protection gap between countries. It would help avert the humanitarian devastation we are currently seeing and will continue to see in coming years, perhaps decades, of increasing poverty, the loss of jobs and livelihoods. And it would demonstrate a commitment to uniting the world on a path towards a more equitable recovery from this pandemic, building resilience for people and for economies to be able to address future shocks. Thank you.
I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Alison. I was just about to write in the chat box to go to your wrap up. But thanks a lot for those very interesting points. I think the link you made with decent work, with quality employment for people, also to ensure people's capacity to lift themselves out of poverty is really, really important. And I think then indeed your last references to an international global solidarity mechanism to help countries and a system in the initial setup of national social protection floors systems in accordance with not only recommendation 2, but also convention 102 is very important, and brings us to our last speaker, who I am going to invite now, because some of you have already referred to some of the important work that the French government has done, amongst others, on the Global Fund for Social Protection. And so I'm delighted to invite Ms. Anouche Carvard, who is the delegate of the French government to the ILO's governing body, as well as the Labour and Employment Task Officer to the G7 and G20. And I am pretty sure that she will be speaking to all of us about the high-level conference they organized about 10 days ago. Ms. Carvard, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation to take part in this important meeting, which very indeed resonates with the high-level experts meeting the government of France co-organized last week with the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty. Together with 85 outstanding experts, international organizations, social partners, and governments representatives, we explored during 2 days ways and means to enhance universal access to social protection floors in the light of the pandemic crisis. During our discussions, we followed a 3-step reasoning. First, we realized we must make the business case for social protection, with the current crisis more severely affecting the most vulnerable. Clearly, social protection measures showed efficiency to provide immediate assistance to those who are most in need. And our colleague from the World Bank talked a lot about it. But prior to COVID-19, Bretton Woods institutions already provided greater recognition of the macro criticality of social spending and the normative framework of international social protection standards enshrined in the ILO recommendation 202 on social protection floors, and also the 2030 SDGs agenda. And finally, there is here a strong political case to make, as social protection is precisely what holds societies together through solidarity and risk-sharing mechanisms. This is why national ownership was outlined to be paramount and to include all actors of the society in its establishment. On this basis, we then discussed the challenges. We acknowledge the growing consensus around the financial needs to fill the social protection coverage gap globally. During the meeting, the ILO presented the last estimates of this annual gap for 2020 by including the so far COVID consequences in the calculation. The figures, as Valérie said, sound considerable, and it is indeed significant. But it's in no way unrealistic. We considered if it is read in the context of a multi-year process through domestic resource mobilization first, based on job formalization and efficient tax systems. And in the context also of global official development assistance then, for which they would actually represent a reasonable share. In the same vein, some experts from regional development banks and national development agencies refuted the concept of donors' fatigue. They, however, underscored the need for enhanced coordination to increase the overall efficiency of their programs against fragmentation and duplication. This is exactly what we called invest better in the ILO definition. This is a central part of the challenge, mapping country by country what is being done in terms of policy and financial interventions. And here we started the third part of our reasoning about the how. We have initiated the mapping process prior and during our expert meeting, and I think it was very informative. Those global initiatives and multilateral platforms we mapped have achieved significant work in the past years, but we also agreed that they should now consider to join forces and establish a multilateral common roadmap, setting up joint guiding policy principles for pooling financing resources. We also underlined the need for coordination on the ground at the country level, where real things happen, through joint country frameworks of interventions, gathering stakeholders around nationally tailored solutions for implementation. We concluded that this policy coordination at both global and national levels will be essential and would be undertaken if we want to make the case for additional resources to be allocated to social protection. No fundraising campaign will ever replace the democratically and internationally established financial capacities and mandates of the international, multilateral, and bilateral financial institutions to come and support the domestic resource mobilizations we all agree on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much as well, Ms. Carvar, also for respecting the time limit. Now, we had hoped to have a little bit more time for questions and answers, but the organizers of socialprotection.org are going to be strict with us. So this session is going to end in about 7 to 8 minutes. So what I'm going to do, because I have been looking attentively at the chat box, I'm going to immediately give you a number of questions, and I'll ask all of you to take about 1 minute in answering those, if that would be possible. So Nenad had a question in the chat box, and I see he already answered to that in the chat box, so thank you so much. Ugo, for you, I have a question from Rachel Moussier, and she was asking what space exists within the IMF and the World Bank to consider and facilitate debt cancellation for low-income countries. And Hugo, there was another question from Matthew. He was wondering whether you could give like a best example of a low-income country scaling up a social assistance program in response to COVID-19. Valerie, for you, there was a question whether you could also share the material on the discussion on informal economy and extending social protection to them with the group. So either in the chat box or later on, perhaps on the webpage of the conference. And Jacob was wondering whether the cost for a social protection floor benefit, specifically for child benefits of 0.6%, whether that is an actual cost or rather a target, what a developing country should be spending on child benefits. Bruno de Keukelier made the point that also the international brands should definitely be mobilized. Sorry, his question now went, but that he was basically stating that international brands should also be mobilized and made responsible to contribute to social protection in countries like Bangladesh, because they take away the bulk of profits. Perhaps Matthias could say something about this. Catherine was wondering what are sustainable options for financing social protection in fragile contexts. Nenad, would you be able to perhaps take this one? And then there was a more general question. If we would start with a global fund, would that not become a challenge for domestic resource mobilization, national ownership? And perhaps we can have some thoughts about this from Alison and Ms. Carver. Would that be okay? I will start with Ugo.
Thank you very much, Bart. I think there was also a question from my dear colleague Shakra that I like also to respond to regarding the reallocation of spending. So yeah, I'll start with that one. And what we have seen is, I wish there was more granular information, but for a few countries, like I mentioned Ukraine, we have seen that the budgets were kind of ring-fenced for health and social policy and in internal affairs, but some of the funding for financing the scale-up came from other sectors. I've seen like reduction in funding for sports programs and the money allocated for the census. I haven't seen reallocation from infrastructure per se, but it's possible, and we will keep looking for it. And other countries like Indonesia and the Philippines, use the reallocation of so-called non-urgent goods expenditures and other budget items that were not yet fully programmed. And again, it's, as I mentioned, it's quite fluid. We have to see the end of the year. On Matthew's question, it depends how you define performance. I think that a number of countries have scaled up at a very impressive rate, at least in planned or actual terms. Bolivia, Peru, Madagascar are some. If you look also at the actual level of coverage per se, I think Haiti is going in that direction, and countries like DRC is doing quite some interesting work in urban areas. But I think a more precise metric of success is maybe the difference between planned and actual transfers. So the level of progress. And Togo, I think, is a nice case, and so is the access program in Pakistan, and Bolivia also, and Peru did quite well in that regard.
Okay, thank you so much, Ugo. Let me then immediately go to Valerie.
Yes. Hello, thanks a lot for the two questions. So regarding the material on the extension of social protection to the informal economy, my colleague Christina Behrens, the head of policy unit in our department, has worked on a comprehensive resource package providing policy recommendations, but also many country examples on what are the barriers for workers in the informal economy and their families to access social protection and how to overcome these barriers. So this is really the resource package that we recommend to use, of course, and to implement and to apply in the ground, in line, of course, with our standards and in particular recommendation 202. So it will be good. We will share that both in the chat, I think, and on the webpage. And my colleague Mira, who's online as well, will share, I think, the link. And regarding the question of the cost for a benefit package for children and the amount, which is 0.6% of GDP. This is a target. It means that we have done through, our colleague Fabio Duran, who is the main author of this financing gap studies, has started with costing a social protection 4 package, which is a generic package, which is not necessarily the package that will be used in each of the countries, but it's a generic package that allows for also a not comparison, but to allow for a global study to estimate the cost for each of these components of the social protection floor. And according to the generic package, the child component package, it's includes child benefits for all children, so it's universal, but age from 0 to 5. And the amounts of the benefits would be set at 25% of the national poverty line. Of course, if you go for a package targeting children from 0 to 18 and at a higher level in terms of percentage of the national poverty line, you will of course achieve a higher cost of this benefit package. So it's not exactly what countries should be spending on social protection floors for children, because what countries should be spending has to be also decided through national dialogues on social protection, including relevant national stakeholders, so the ministries in charge of social protection and social partners and also civil society. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Valerie. I think on that point, indeed, of ownership, we will get back to that when both Ms. Kavar and Ms. Tate can reflect again on the Global Fund. But before we do that, I would like to invite Nenad Rava, if he would like to say something on financing social protection in fragile contexts.
Thank you very much. So, I can talk only from our experience and very briefly for the time given. So we have several joint programs in fragile contexts, and the approach that we are applying is that we are working on building systems. So we are not focused on immediate delivery of social protection services or benefits. We are working with the government and other stakeholders, so it's never only the government, in building the systems. The idea is that eventually fragile contexts will stop to be fragile, and to get to that point, they need to have institutions. And social protection is one of the main institutional setups that they will require to get out of fragility. It's sort of a vicious circle. So our intention is focused on how to build strong foundations, how to ensure funding and financing in transitionary stages, and then eventually come to the point where there's more stability, and this institution actually contributes to stability, and then stability contributes back in terms of strengthening the institutions. So this is the idea in basically all joint programs that we have in the fragile context. That does not disregard the issues they have on short term, but our intention is really to work on system design and setting up very strong pillars of the institutions that should emerge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Nenad. We're really going towards the end. Luckily, the colleagues of socialprotection.org have given us a few extra minutes. So, Matthias, could I invite you to reflect on the responsibility that international companies do have in, of course, also financing social protection, especially in the countries where they source much of their production?
Thank you so much. The garment industry is in crisis, or the whole sector is in crisis because of COVID-19 and the lockdown of shops and what all comes with it. So there is no possibility for funding also from the international level, from the brands, because they are themselves in deep trouble, right? When you look at the numbers, how much debts actually the big garment industry companies have because of the crisis, you will see there's no room and no possibility actually to bring funding from that side. And by the way, there's of course a bigger issue, right? If a company is sourcing from Switzerland, would they be expected to pay for social protection in Switzerland? No, they wouldn't. So there is a bigger issue actually about the rules and responsibilities and who is to do what. And that comes back to the whole question about strengthening social protection system at national level, so not to be depending from the outside world. Let me also just mention one point about the Global Fund. From our perspective, the ILO is really the organization which has the capacity, the mandate, and the expertise to strengthen social protection floors at national levels. From our side, it is really the ILO who should be in the lead, and we should not establish another organization which might be in competition, which might undermine the whole aim of policy coherence and coordination. Just focus on what we have and strengthen already the systems which we have in place. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Matthias, for those comments. I think indeed on the first point, I think it leaves room for discussion, but we don't have it right here, because I would like to invite now Ms. Carver and then Ms. Tate for their final comments indeed on the fund and the challenge with regards to domestic resource mobilization and national ownership. How do we respond to that?
Thank you very much. If I may, because I must leave just afterwards for another conference, I just wanted to underline the fact that during the 2 days of meetings, we realized that there are different steps. The first one is about data and evidence. That's what Valérie Schmidt brought about. What is the financing gap and what is the scope, of the financial needs. The second one is about mapping what's going on country by country, because all, fund bringers, we're talking about duplication and fragmentation in the matter of financing social protection floors and assistance. The third one is about a roadmap at the multilateral level, setting up guiding policy principles, because pooling financing resources, if we do not know where we exactly go, is a very useless exercise. The fourth step is about joint country frameworks of interventions in a whole of government approach and gathering all stakeholders around nationally tailored solutions for implementation. And only after we've done this policy coordination, this mapping, this evidence and data collection, of course, we may think how to make the case for additional resources to national resources for through an international financial mechanism. What we really heard, and Secretary General Angel Gurria made a real case about it, is that we do have resources at the international level and for development. Striking figures were provided by Secretary General Gurria about that in his opening address to our expert meeting. So this is the way we, at this point, at the end of the expert meeting, we see things going on, and we call on governments before anything to take the political resolve to invest more and to invest better in social protection floors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Carver. Alison.
So very quickly to add on to what was just said, in terms of domestic resource mobilization, that obviously needs to provide the basis for a sustainable social protection system. So the principles of national ownership of not just governments, but also social partners and other relevant stakeholders having inputs into the design, the priorities setting, the needs analysis is essential to having a sustainable social protection floor. So where, however, there has not been the financial capacity for some of the poorest countries in the world, and indeed to build up to ensure extension for coverage of, for example, informal economy workers in many countries, what we need to see is an international commitment to kick-starting those systems. And what we will see is that the multiplier effect of investing in social protection will add to aggregate demand, will increase the capacity for government budgets. We need to look at other factors mentioned today in terms of tax revenues and contributory schemes as a contribution to a revenue base for sustainable social protection. And I would say, just adding the final point to what Anusha was just mentioning, where government budgets are allocated to social protection, or indeed funding from donor governments or other international donor partners, then it is a matter of political priority. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Very strong final messages also from you, Alison. I think we've heard some really, really interesting points being made by the different speakers. The commitment that we still take, myself together with some of the colleagues who have pulled this together, is to wrap up some of these key points and feed them into a report of this session. And that will be also available on the webpage of the Global Conference. Some colleagues in the chat box were also asking if the materials that we used, like the PowerPoint, would also be made available. Of course, we will be doing that shortly after this session. Then I show you now some of the upcoming roundtables and sessions over the next few days. So today, there's a few more roundtables. One also looking at unemployment protection and the informal economy. And then tomorrow, there's a whole range of side events. Those who would like to learn more about the idea of the Global Fund. We've had already some key ideas shared here today, but tomorrow, the Global Coalition for Social Protection Floors is hosting a side event at 8 a.m. as well, Central European time on this with different speakers, also from the ITUC, from trade unions, etc. But as you see, many others, impacts of COVID-19 in rural areas, expanding social protection to decrease inequality, you name it, many of these topics are indeed on the agenda for tomorrow. So I am really sorry that I cannot take all questions, because it's true, there's a few more interesting questions. I would ask maybe the speakers to look at the chat box, because there was indeed a question from Diego about the World Bank and debt cancellation. There was a colleague who asked also how to deal with the disability lens when setting up social protection policies. And finally, somebody who wanted to have some concrete examples in the wake of COVID-19, how the nexus can be made between humanitarian actors and development actors. So for those who are looking at the chat, some of my speakers, if you'd like to reply to some of those, that would be much appreciated. But I am afraid that I will have to close it here. We're nearly 9:15. Without, of course, first of all, thanking very much all of the speakers who were here today. Thanks a lot for being with us. And of course, all of the participants. It was great to have you. You were a great audience, very active as well. And we continue to debate in the next few sessions. Thank you so much. And probably see you around in some of the other roundtables.
Thank you, Bart.
Thank you, Bart.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye, Mr. Rahman.
Bye-bye then.
Meeting, leave it.
Oh, okay.